in this episode.
So bearing in mind that AI in its, it's in the language model format is using language. That for me is one way in which we can start to bring in psychoanalysis into this discussion, because it's clear that our interactions with AI is through language. We're not. I'm not obviously I'm talking here about the chatbots in this paper. I'm not talking, for instance, about robots or other forms of machinery, which is something I mentioned in the paper. But yeah, it's that relationship you can have, or that interaction you can have through language, which is where I think, this more, call it, psychoanalytic, more of a philosophical perspective can come through. Because I do think, I think I've had this discussion before. I think, particularly within sociology, and perhaps even more so, obviously, with more the science-based disciplines, is that there's this assumption that we communicate freely and that we just need more communication, between different groups, between different cultures, or, you know, it really boils my blood when sociologists say, well, everything's socially constructed through language. And yeah, okay, yeah, we know that. Well, yeah, that's true. But also communication is incredible, is an awful lot of miscommunication. Because, you know, if we communicated freely, then I'm just almost certain the world would not be the mess that it currently is. And I would also think that if we communicated freely, we wouldn't have developed language as subjects. I think, language emerges from the fact that we talk through miscommunication. I think if there's anything that haunts the subject, it's the fact that we have to try and make sense of this world and ourselves through language. So it's always mediated, therefore it's always separated, and it's often a very confusing way of making sense of the world, despite the fact that it's all we've got to make sense of the world is language.
Hey everyone, welcome to my conversation with the philosopher, sociologist, and psychoanalytic theorist, Dr. Jack Black. Not the actor, although as equally cool as the actor. Uh, when it comes to this conversation around AI, or perhaps more the philosophy of AI, the research, of course, is multifaceted and myriad. And I think there are the people that kind of theorize on probably the kind of work that I'm doing on how can we have sentient AI or AI that has some sense of human level intelligence dealing with uncertainty without being pre-trained on a massive data set. And how can we develop systems that are robust to the extent that we humans are robust and adaptable. And on the other side, there are people kind of working on what you would call the relationship between AI and human beings. Perhaps a more classical term and more analytic philosophy would be HCI, human computer interaction. Now, this field, of course, has a lot of scientific uses, of course, in the neuro and cognitive sciences and then the social sciences. But at the same time, and here's where I find Jack's work very interesting, there's these more metaphysical questions of what does AI tell us about human subjectivity or subjectivity as such. And I asked Jack, when psychoanalytic theorists or people coming from more of his Lacanian, Jacobian, Hegelian tradition, when they speak of the subject, what do they mean by the subject? Is the concept of subjectivity akin to what someone like Dave Chalmers would call consciousness, or someone like Andy Clark would call the extended mind? So there are all these questions around subjectivity, and I'm glad that at the outset of the conversation, I did ask Jack this and we discussed this. And the big thing here, of course, is the unconscious. In certain areas, certain fields, a very controversial term to put out there. But I think the way Jack, particularly working off the theory of Lacan and Zizek, does introduce a very distinct and interesting set of ideas into this dialogue around consciousness or subjectivity or our relationship, as in the subject's relationship to AI and machines. And it's along those lines I reached out to Jack when I came across this paper, Can AI Lie? Because he does make a very interesting claim in the paper that something very innate and unique to subjectivity is the ability for us to lie. There are all these questions about AI alignment and AI ethics. So when are we going to have super intelligent AI? And this conversation is ongoing, and sometimes the topics are discussed ad nauseum. However, you wouldn't think that what makes humans particularly unique to any other entity in the universe would probably be how we lie and the kind of the way we use language and how a lie is intertwined into how language works and functions for human beings. So there's a lot there, and certainly if you are not coming from this camp of Lacan, Jack Hegel, this might seem a bit out there, but Jack I found was a very sort of down to earth, just like speaks in very colloquial terms, no big jargon. So I think, and also more importantly, I think he does make a lot of sense, and he cogently kind of articulates these points. With all that being said, before we get to the conversation, of course, a quick PSA. As you may know, I've mentioned multiple times I'll never have advertisers or sponsors on this podcast. Frankly, I think we live in a society of excess and overconsumption, and I don't want to contribute to that by selling you more things. That being said, though, forgive me for the tautology. We, for better or worse, live in the world we live in. I run this podcast on top of doing a full-time job while doing my master's, and if I am to sustain this project, I need some kind of financial backing. So if you have the means, please do consider financially supporting this podcast through Patreon, Substack, or PayPal. All the links will be in the show notes. And if you're wondering, what are the perks? What are you going to get? The honest answer is nothing. That's right. There's no exclusive behind the paywall perks. You're simply supporting this project if you think the already free content that's publicly available is of any value to you. I sincerely do want to thank the existing supporters on Patreon, Substack, and even PayPal. However, if you're considering supporting the project, please do so only if you have the means. All right, back to the episode. Dr. Jack Black is an associate professor of culture, media, and sport at Sheffield Hallam University, UK, where he's affiliated with the Centre for Culture, Media, and Society and is research lead for the Anti-Racism Research Group. He's an interdisciplinary researcher primarily focused on Freudo-Lacanian psychoanalysis, media, and cultural studies, authoring numerous books, including The Psychosis of Race, Racism and Political Correctness in Comedy, which was published with Routledge, and co-authored the edited collections of Sport and Psychoanalysis. Dr. Black has also written about the relationship between AI and humans, which was a central subject of this discussion. As I was saying, it was a really fun conversation with Jack, and I hope to talk to him again soon. And I think hopefully when his next book is out, which is on the relationship between sport and psychoanalysis, I'd love to invite him on again soon. With all that being said, without further ado, here's my conversation with Dr. Jack Black. Jack, thanks for being here, man. It's truly a privilege. Really enjoy reading your paper. Why not start with a big, meaty, metaphysical question? What is a subject, and can a machine ever become a subject?
Okay, good. Yeah, no, that is the best question to probably start with. So for me, a subject is read in through Lacan, so in a Lacanian register. So for me, the subject, and we can probably expand upon this with further questions later on, but for me, the subject is a being of lack, and it's obviously it has an unconscious, and it's self-divided. So if we start from those sort of premises, that's where I sort of was really interested in looking at whether or not AI, and obviously one of the debates in AI technology is, can it replicate or become, can it create or can it establish a level of intelligence which is replicable to the human being, to the human subject? So these were nice questions that I could ask in relation to that with regards to AI. So for me, can an AI be a subject? At present, no, because I think there's a number of important characteristics which define the human subject, which through Lacan can allow us to unpick that question in relation to AI and whether or not AI will ever have, consciousness on a level that, as I said, is similar to the subject. So yeah, they're two ways, yeah, two good positions I think to start from.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I like the delineation you make in the paper between kind of the, let's call it the positivistic sciences. What they study is the Cartesian subject, more the conscious side of the subject. However, I believe for you, something like a human being has this other, more of the, let's call it the negative side, or the split side, the unconscious,
Yeah,
which you can't capture, at least as far as we know, through the natural sciences, like I think you say computer science, mathematics, neuroscience, and so on, which kind of encompasses the
Yeah.
the AI research world.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that, that for me will always be the ultimate crux of positivism is that it assumes that Cartesian rational subject. And obviously, call it the beauty of psychoanalysis and, the Freud and the introduction of the unconscious, but just more widely, I'm in my 30s and nothing of my experience of the world has proven that we are rational subjects or that we act rationally. We may make conscious decisions, but there are obviously reasons and desires and fantasies and unconscious elements to that which fuel and choose those decisions for us, perhaps. So for me, yeah, there's something really interesting there that we can explore. And critique, particularly when we look at positivism and those type of things. I've done that more recently, actually, in the context of sport. I've really sort of tried to take to task a lot of sports science research, and in particular, sports psychology, which for me is really sort of indebted to that positivistic outlook and doesn't really appreciate that there's this thing about sport that might actually speak more to the unconscious. So yeah, it goes across, as I say, it goes across numerous topics, and I think it's an interesting way of looking at the world and approaching these types of debates.
As a matter of fact, if you don't mind, I think, Jack, it's worth mentioning this because I will be talking. I mean, in the introduction, the listener would know that I'm going to talk about your work
Yeah,
in theorizing sports through psychoanalysis, but perhaps it's
yeah,
a good concrete example on how you explore this through your work in analyzing sports. So maybe just give us a bit of a
yeah.
brief outline it briefly for us.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. So I thought so my background is actually in sports science. So my undergraduate degree was in sports science. My master's was in sociology of sport. And then I did my PhD. My PhD was essentially a sociology PhD. But it was really from about 2015, 2016 onwards. I had numerous colleagues and friends say to me, "Have you read Zizek?" And and once I just remember that I had this incredible summer where I went, right, I've got to start. Well, what I actually did, there's a bit of a lie. I tried to read Plague of Fantasies in the third year of my PhD. I got through 4 pages and I sat there and I thought to myself, I don't understand a word of what is being said. Um, I did, and there was the only point I said to myself, I just thought, well, perhaps you're not mentally mature enough to understand what it is he's trying to say. And I think that's probably a good thing to say to any, undergraduate students or postgraduate students. If you don't understand anything, it's not because you're stupid or anything like that. You're just not at a point in your life where these things are going to make sense to you. Because then, a few years later, probably what would it have been like 4 or 5 years later, I returned to Plague of Fantasies, and I remember, I think I got through the first 40 pages, and I looked at the note and I was like, my God, how have I? Because it made sense. It made, the things he was saying were sort of there. So yeah, it was reading Zizek and then reading Lacan. And then a lot of my research has tended to focus on media and cultural studies. And then it was probably about 4 years ago, I started thinking, hold on a sec, I really am missing something here. I've got a background in sport. I work in a sport department. I really should start applying psychoanalysis to sport. So in particular with my friend Joseph Renosso, we've sort of worked together on various projects trying to bring together the world of psychoanalysis to sport. We're both Lacanians, so we tend to draw upon Lacanian theory, but we've done an edited book and a special issue, which have both explored those connections. So, yeah, so I always have, I think the good thing about this AI stuff is I tend to read something and then that gets me thinking about AI, and then I sort of, I don't know, perhaps there's something wrong with me, but then I have to write a paper on it just to get the thoughts and ideas out. So I tend to have these two streams to my research. I tend to have a sport and psychoanalysis stream, and then a more, call it media and cultural studies stream, which obviously was referring here to AI. So, and the beauty of Lacan is these things cross over. So different concepts make sense, I think, in different topics, or you might not, for instance, understand. So, for instance, yesterday. I was at a conference. I was talking there about Lacan's language, and it's been a concept that I've struggled with or had to learn over the last few years. But in the context I was speaking about, it kind of made sense. For me, it was helping me understand it. So again, I think that's one of the fun things of Lacan is that there's this wealth of concepts and ideas that all interrelate, but can also be applied to different topics and projects.
Yeah, no doubt. I kind of think of Lacanian theory kind of the way how Kierkegaard speaks of religion, where it's not
Right.
that you look at different kinds of, so he, I'm obviously paraphrasing here. Kierkegaard
Yeah.
says that like, you look at different religions, and I'm like, okay, Christianity has these things, and Islam has these things, Buddhism has these things, and I
Yeah.
tick all the boxes. I pick Christianity, but he's like, no, if you think you're an idiot, that's not how it works. You see the truths of Christianity by, in fact, first becoming a Christian, and I think
Yeah.
Zizek writes on how Pascal kind of takes this into the
Yes.
Pascalian wager. Um, so I view Lacanian theory kind of like that, where if you want to, like, if you think, okay, I'm just gonna try and juxtapose cognitive science and Lacanian theory, or I'm gonna try and compare Jungian theory with Lacanian theory and see what works out best. I don't think that works. I think you need to kind of
No.
become a Lacanian first to see what
Yeah.
Lacan's.
No, I think that's a great connection. Yeah, I think you're completely right. And I think we were discussing it before as well. I mean, if anybody wants to understand Lacan, well, I think that, there's the reference there to Zizek, isn't it? Who essentially says if you try and read Lacan on his own, it's gobbledygook. It's very difficult. Find a key, find someone to help you into it, and whether that's someone like Bruce Fink, whether that's someone like Zizek, Alenka Shapanjic, Madeline Dola, or other scholars such as Todd McGowan, Murray Ruti, there are ways in which you can get in. And as soon as you see the way in which they present it, you then read Lacan, and it just comes alive. And yeah, for me, it's like a drug. Yeah, actually, it's you just devour the seminars after that because they just make so much sense, and they really shed light on the world in ways that I weren't taught to look at the world. Put it that way, which I quite
That's it.
enjoy.
Yeah, I completely
Yeah,
agree. I mean, for me, it's funny. Like a lot of people get into like Han through Zizek because of just like he's a big, charismatic, huge figure. But for me, it was Mary Rudy, and I really through her books.
yeah,
Funny enough, I picked up a book on. I think it was marketed as an anti-self-help book, but I thought it was
right,
a self-help book, and I read
right,
it when I was like 18, 19 maybe.
yeah.
And I was like, oh, who's this Lacan guy? Like, and then I Googled it and then one of Zizek's videos came up and that's kind of how I fell into it.
Oh,
So
that's brilliant. That's it's not the one of the only books I think there's only about two of those I haven't actually read, but and one of which it's not the penis envy book, is it?
no, it's not the Penis Envy one. No, this
All
is
right, I'm literally reading this one at the minute. This was that's I hadn't read Penis Envy before, so I'm reading that now. But as I said, I was at a conference this week, and as I was getting on the plane, like one of my colleagues sort of said, what you're reading, and I just went into this 15-minute discussion on how brilliant the book was and how wonderful Mary
yeah.
Ruti, was as a writer. And I think, when he's, yeah, I was worried everyone in the queue was thinking, who's this crazy person? But
Nah,
yeah,
it's
um,
Penis Envy, right? It's yeah, we lost her too soon, man. It's sad. I mean, she was great
yeah,
because she was fantastic, as you said, at kind of
yeah,
articulating in a very almost like commonsensical way Lacanian theory. I
yeah,
mean, she had a conversation with the physicist Sean Carroll, for instance, who's like
right,
he's very,
yeah,
empiricist, that kind of thinking.
yeah,
But she beautifully outlined what psychoanalysis is all about and Lacanian theory to even a person like him. The
definitely,
book
yeah,
is, by the way, it's yeah, this sounds just like a self-help book. The Call of Character, Living a Life
yes,
Worth Living. So you'd think that this is a a self-help book, but no, it was a
yeah.
really fun book to read.
No, yeah. No,
Yeah,
a beautiful writer as well. I didn't know her. I saw her present at a conference online, but there's something, yeah. So I never want to speak too flippantly on these, but there's something beautiful about the fact you can just live in her books now. So she's always like there. If you know, like there's something I always think there's something quite wonderful about writing books in that respect, that these sort of, yeah, you can return to them. And she's, like I said, she's such a brilliant writer. You do feel like she's like talking to you. It's quite a
I
lovely,
agree.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, Jack, so to kind of yeah, sorry, I'm kind of taking us off course here, but that was a good, fun, I guess, tangent to go on. Um,
yeah,
the the question of AI and psychoanalysis, I mean, it's obviously the kind of the theme of this conversation I'm hoping is going to be, can AI lie? But
yeah,
again, just to build a bit of groundwork, let's say, how about maybe you could tell us for those working in the philosophy of AI, or kind of let's call it the sociology of AI, or kind of analyzing AI outside of purely just like the engineering, building, programming sense. But even for those people who are kind of thinking
Yeah.
about this, what insights, in your view, does psychoanalysis in particular have for thinking about artificial intelligence?
Yeah, I mean, just to not repeat what I've already said, but I think the way it's sent, or well, in many ways, psychoanalysis decenters the subject, but in the way in which it puts the subject forward as a topic or a point of discussion or inquiry. So for me, what I think that, and if you're looking at Lacanian, if you're looking at the Lacanian subject, you're automatically starting to look at language. You're starting to look at the ambiguity of the subject and how that is often reflected through language. So bearing in mind that AI in its, it's in the language model format is using language. That for me is one way in which we can start to bring in psychoanalysis into this discussion, because it's clear that our interactions with AI is through language. We're not. I'm not obviously I'm talking here about the chatbots in this paper. I'm not talking, for instance, about robots or other forms of machinery, which is something I mentioned in the paper. But yeah, it's that relationship you can have, or that interaction you can have through language, which is where I think, this more, call it, psychoanalytic, more of a philosophical perspective can come through. Because I do think, I think I've had this discussion before. I think, particularly within sociology, and perhaps even more so, obviously, with more the science-based disciplines, is that there's this assumption that we communicate freely and that we just need more communication, between different groups, between different cultures, or, it really boils my blood when sociologists say, well, everything's socially constructed through language. And yeah, okay, yeah, we know that. Well, yeah, that's true. But also communication is an awful lot of miscommunication. Because, you know, if we communicated freely, then I'm so much certain the world would not be the mess that it currently is. And I would also think that if we communicated freely, we wouldn't have developed language as subjects. I think, language emerges from the fact that we talk through miscommunication. I think if there's anything that haunts the subject, it's the fact that we have to try and make sense of this world and ourselves through language. So it's always mediated, therefore it's always separated, and it's often a very confusing way of making sense of the world, despite the fact that it's all we've got to make sense of the world is language. So yeah, for me, that's one of the conundrums of the subject, which those sort of, distinctions you can start to bring in. Um, I remember saying this once. I work on a project with a statistician, a great academic, but very statistical. Comes up with like AI formulas to identify online hate and forms of expressions of online hate. And I remember saying this to him, and he went, "Jack, please, no. Language has to mean these terms have to. Otherwise, I can't train the computer." And that I thought was really interesting because there was no room for ambiguity in what he was doing, and that itself was being sort of put into this algorithm, and this machine would therefore scour certain events and on Twitter in particular for forms of online hate. But we learned out very quickly that language wasn't as clear as perhaps he was assuming. So
Okay,
yeah,
so let's kind of try to speculate a bit here. Now, you take an LLM. Any really most of the LLMs a big problem, and there's like, in fact, I think billions of dollars invested just on researching this particular area where hallucinations in LLMs. So they talk about how LLMs randomly hallucinate. I mean, when I remember when I think it was GPT 3.5, or when it came out with ChatGPT, the initial versions were hallucinating like crazy. And
yeah,
so I don't know. I think I'm being a bit pedantic here, but I'm being pedantic, I think, more for the sake of someone who's not familiar with this notion of miscommunication. So
mhm,
what if, someone says, "Hey, look, I mean, AI kind of already is a mess. Large
yeah,
language models already do hallucinate. They already do lie, and they already do deceive, not deceive intentionally, but
yeah,
at least give um, unfactual information, or spew complete utter
yeah,
nonsense at times." So
yeah.
maybe delineate, what do you mean by miscommunication in the context of how Lacanian theory and psychoanalysis views language, as opposed to all these other examples I just gave?
Yeah, no, that's a great link and a great question. So yeah, obviously they AI and chatbots can get things wrong, and they often do. So they're clearly inconsistent machines, and they can also lie as well. So, in particular, in my paper, that the paper emerged from, I think, an article that Zizek had written and published online, where he was trying to test the AI or asking the AI, "Should I be a communist?" Um, and the AI gave a very sort of AI response. Um, and it said, I can't remember exactly what the way it was, so I'm paraphrasing, but the AI essentially said something like, I'm not a real person, I can't give you advice on which, whether or not you should be a communist or not. And Zizek says, he says that's a lie, and it fundamentally relies upon what he often refers to as the "I know very well, but nonetheless," from Octave Manoni. So the argument here is that although the the AI is technically telling the truth, it's not a real person. There is no but it doesn't have that but nevertheless. So in that sense, there is a lie at play there because despite the fact that it is telling the truth, in actual fact, it's talking, despite the fact it says I'm not a real person, it is talking like a real person and expressing a statement. So in our interactions with it, we have to assume on a certain level that we are talking to some type of person, or something just to have the basic interaction. So what this got me thinking about was how important lying was not just to the unconscious, but also how important lying was to distinguishing what it is that makes us subjects. So yes, AI can lie. But what I argue in the paper is it doesn't lie like a subject. It doesn't, for instance, lie authentically. Now, I use that term authentically not to say that there is some higher level or purer form of lying, but to say that actually, when we, as human beings, when we talk, when we communicate, there's often lies embedded in the way in which we talk and to discuss about things. That actually we lie in various different ways, just as being subjects. So this again just got me thinking about so many different issues. The link between truth and lie isn't so demarcated. It's not so split. That actually the two are sort of. I think this is Alenka Zupančič who argues this. That they're actually asymmetrical. So there's actually a connection there between the two. So for me, that's one way in which we can start to distinguish what makes subjects different. Is that subjects lie in a particular way, and that you could explore through some of Lacan's concepts and ideas. Um, as I said, the lie from the chat GPT is, it's almost like a very, I don't know what the terminology is, it's almost like a robotic lie, you know what I mean? But in itself, you know, it might say it's not a real person, but it is acting and interacting as if it is a real person in the way it asks you little prompts, the way it discusses and gives its own little opinions on stuff. Yeah, that was, I thought, something quite interesting.
And then when a human being, engages with the AI, would you say it's
Yeah,
some sort of, to use a term by Zupančič, like fetishistic denial, where, because you mentioned the I know very well, but is that kind of
yeah,
where the fetishistic denial comes in, or
yeah.
am I kind of off course there?
No, no, I think you're on, I think you're right because the argument Zizek is making is that there is no but nevertheless. So I know very well, but nevertheless, and it's actually the but nevertheless, which is really interesting in any sort of exploration of that idea or that concept. Obviously, Supanjic has written more recently in a book on disavow that there's a
Wow.
fetishization of the I
Agreed.
know. Yeah, so there's a verticalization of the knowledge, but it's where that but nonetheless is for me where the ambiguities of the subject start to come out. That's where you get expressions of disavow. That's also where you get the ambiguity of perhaps the subject. It's also where it ties in with ideology, so you can make that broader social link as well. So, for instance, the most obvious one would be, our current ideological position, which is clearly one of cynicism. I know very well that capitalism is awful with all these problems, but nevertheless, I'm embedded in it. I still have to get a job. I have to pay the mortgage. I have to go to the supermarket. The way in which it sort of embeds you in its sort of structures is the way in which ideology is played out. So yeah, so that there is no but nonetheless or but nevertheless. There's none of that in the AI, which is really interesting, I think. And that was kind of the crux, really, the jumping off point from where I wanted to explore this notion of lying, from Zizek's original piece.
Yeah, so I don't know if the term is a dialectic, but in a certain sense, there's a dialectic between truth and lies, right? So you say in the
Yeah.
paper, like you say, ultimately, what is true is itself accessed via the falsity of a premise, a truth
Yes.
that is brought to light via the means of a lie. Now, that
Yeah.
is going to be really, people are going to think that that's just like unnecessary obfuscation. What do you mean by
No.
a
Yeah.
truth that is brought to light via the means of a lie? Now, I know very well what you're saying there, especially because Zizek makes he kind of makes the other point where you can tell a lie by means
Yeah.
of truth, and he uses the famous example of the Jews here. The Nazis were saying kind of empirically you can say, yeah, the Jews they were exploiting workers. Yeah, probably there were probably some capitalist Jews. Yeah, the
Yeah.
Jews were seducing German women in the 1950s. Yeah, my gosh, I hope they were. Yeah, that's good if they were. But
Yeah.
but still, anti-Semitism is nonetheless a lie. So it's like, and
Yeah.
so how do you make the point that, well, yes, by a truth can be brought to life via lies.
Yeah, so this is again, and it took me. I did spend a couple of weeks sort of going through this. It is because it's quite counterintuitive. So the example you drew upon was brilliant there, and that's actually the example I always refer to. So you often have this distinction between lying with truth and telling the truth by the means of a lie. So in the first instance is the one you highlighted there, which Zizek often draws upon. So it's lying with truth. So for instance, as you quite rightly said, what did the Nazis do in 1930s Germany? Well, they said, look, the Jews are all in these positions of power. They're in banking, they're in, the media, they're in politics. And that's the reason why this country's, that's the reason why Germany's struggling. They're the problem. Now, the crux of that is actually that there's a truth to that because the Jews were in those positions and they were in those jobs. But the lie comes from the way in which it was used and the way in which the truth in that respect is undermined or through the lie, if that makes sense. So I was trying to think of various different examples in which we could do this. The only one I could, and again, I sort of jumped to a sporting example. Whereas, if someone said, we never lose at home, we never lose when we have a match at home. Okay, well, if you've only had one game at home, then that is lying with the truth in a certain respect. Now you're true, you've never lost at home, but the lie comes out in the fact that actually you haven't really been very clear there. You've only had one match at home. So that's one way in which lying and truth don't see them as separate things, but they're sort of interrelated, I think, in the point that's coming out of that. And the next one is obviously like telling the truth by means of a lie. So this is where you have a falsehood that reveals a deeper truth. And this is one I think that's really quite interesting because I think this comes out in so many different ways. So, you might have it with, you might say to your partner, I don't know, I love you to the moon and back or something, or I love you more than, all the whatever in the world. Now, obviously, I can't love anybody from the moon to the back. That's a ridiculous thing to say. It's a lie, but it tells a truth. It highlights the love you have for somebody. Um, you might have again a football coach who says, our team never gives up, but they might be on a bit of a losing streak and and the results aren't very good. So again, the team might not give up, but it's a lie in that respect. So this for me opens up a whole, telling the truth by means of a lie, opens up this whole world in which we can approach various different issues. And one of the things I've looked at, I looked at this in regards to counterfactual history, something that Zizek's written a lot on, and yeah, so I was interested in how this asymmetry between truth and lies can come out through the way in which we often approach the past. So I think I did read a book. I read it during my PhD. I was trying to find it the other day actually, in preparation for this. So I can't remember exactly what the title was, but I think it was an edited collection written by the historian Niall Ferguson, and it was essentially, at any historical moment, what if the opposite had occurred? So, for instance, what if Germany had won the First World War? What would have happened? So it was counterfactual histories. But the book was really good because it sort of grasped what Zizek is getting at here, and it sort of highlighted the importance of this relationship between truth and lying. Because the argument there that Zizek makes is that it's only from a counterfactual premise, so something that didn't happen or something that is not true, that you can actually find a path or find the truth of the factual. So this doesn't mean that you can just come up with any sort of version of anything and just, talk complete and utter nonsense. What it actually means is you need to find the right lie to arrive at truth. And that for me was a really interesting dilemma or a really interesting way of approaching certain things. So, regardless of what you think of the film, I became really interested in sort of, when I was reading this, Quentin Tarantino's sort of historical little era of films, where he had Django Unchained, Inglourious Bastards, and there was The Hateful Eight. Now, obviously, they're not true history really in any true sense. I wrote a paper on Django Unchained, the film Django Unchained, where I explored this. Obviously, the film it doesn't draw upon any historical truth in any real sense. It's not like 12 Years a Slave, for example. But actually, what I make the argument is that you can actually, through that creating this counterfactual world, this fictional world, that there's truths about slavery that actually come out of the film that we can really explore. So for me, that was one, a good example of how you can make this counterfactual argument. Perhaps, and I do say this in the paper, perhaps in a way that 12 Years a Slave fails, because 12 Years a Slave is obviously, a very well produced, well directed film. But the lead character, I always found the film so strange because you watch that film, 12 Years a Slave, and then I don't think this is a spoiler in any sense, and then you finish the film and you realize that actually, I can't remember the first, it's Northrop, isn't it? I think the main character it's based upon. But he's a free man. He's then kidnapped, turned into a slave, becomes a slave in the South, and then he's freed. But actually, he dies in really mysterious circumstances. Like he essentially, I think he disappeared. Like I think he then became like an abolitionist speaker, and clearly became a sort of a political whatever figure to try to prevent slavery. But then there's the argument that was he murdered because he does just disappear and just die. I think his family he just never came home one day, and that is just like a title card at the end of the film. And I always thought, my God, that's the film. I've just sat through 12 Years a Slave, but that to me is perhaps says more about slavery and black oppression and racism in America than what the film just did in all those narratives and scenes that it created. So, I make the point there. I would argue Django Unchained is a better film about slavery for that reason, because it uses a fictional premise to make better truths and better insights into African slavery in the US during that period, and perhaps still today, and especially the way in that very postmodern way that Quentin Tarantino mixes genres, but also past and present, sort of a temporality aspect there. So I know that's a very roundabout way, and I know we moved
Yeah,
away a bit from it
perfect.
there,
Yeah,
but
it's good they
but
use
this
concrete examples there.
but so for me, if we're making this distinction between lying with truth and telling the truth by means of a lie, there's clearly an ambiguity there which speaks to the subject. It gets to the subject, and I don't think AI can understand that distinction, or it doesn't perform that distinction in the same way that a subject does. Um, um,
I
we
agree.
mentioned it before. Yeah, yeah.
I
So I
was
think
just going to add something here, but no, you finish your
yeah.
thought, please.
No, no, go on, no, because I was going to mention about the lies paradox. So I don't know if that's one way you
Oh
want
yeah,
you were going
we're gonna get there for sure. Yeah, that's a
no
whole
worries.
other
Yeah,
section. Because the thing is, Jack, I think I had this thought, in fact, last week when we
yeah,
originally planned to record this before I got sick. It was a notion of, I mean, what you're saying here, this is kind of the Kenyan notion that truth is structured like fiction, kind of there's like a truth in like
yeah,
a symbolic world that can
yeah,
appear in some sense.
yeah,
Uh, but it's a bit different to like a metaphorical truth, isn't it? Because I think the problem with the metaphorical truth is it kind of points, so it kind of says there's a thing in itself, there's like a substantial truth, and metaphor is
yeah,
kind of like a signifier, or it's something that symbolizes this substantial truth, this ontologically real thing somewhere.
yeah,
Whereas, correct me if I'm wrong here, maybe I'm just putting words in your mouth. What you're trying to argue in this paper is, in some sense, it's in the split, the not working, or let's
yeah,
call it in the contradiction as such, where the truth appears. It's not so. I think Zizek makes this point. When you behind the veil, there's nothing. There's nothing. There's
yeah,
no. nothing that you can speak of in any meaningful
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, yeah, brilliant. Yeah, you're right. So yeah, for me, there's a contradiction in truth. So in a weird way, like truth can only be accessed or mediated. In this case, obviously, we've been drawn upon fictions and through lies. But the truth there is, like you said, there's nothing behind the veil. There's a gap. There's a lack that is obviously inherent to reality. I think that's the link that Zizek's made, or the improvement or the development that Zizek's made of Lacan. Whereas for Lacan, lack was obviously ontologically embedded in our sense of beings as subject. It's from lack that we desire. It's from lack that we speak. You know, we're lacking beings, hence we need language to try and make sense of that lack or to cover it up. But then it's also something that is then retroactively created as well. You know, we have this sort of it's always the subject is always working backwards in that respect.
The connection to
So
Hegel.
yes, yeah, yeah, and that's obviously that's the brilliance of Zizek bringing in Hegel into these Lacanian discussions. So for me, metaphor is quite interesting because for me, I'm a fan of metaphor in the sense that metaphor is one way in which you can expose lack in, or you can expose that ontological lack. Matthew Fliss-Fleder has a brilliant book, Algorithmic Desire, where he says that we should use the social media metaphor. You think of social media as a metaphor because what it gets us thinking about is that idea of creating a media which is in itself social. So there's nothing inherent to social media, but through metaphor and through obviously fiction or just through the symbolic and through political action, we create the media we want. And I think it's one way of always, the thing to get there is you're never fixed. This is a key bit of Lacan. Meaning is never fixed. He's not I would say like a daft bloody postmodernist where, everything's fluid, everything, meaning can be anything or no. There are
Sorry,
times when
can I
meaning,
for a bit? Hey,
yeah,
if you could just, that's a really important point. You do
yeah,
touch on that even in the paper, that the
yeah,
Lacanian subject is different to the postmodern subject. So just if you could, as maybe as an addendum, comment on that
yeah.
too. It's important for
No,
this.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think Lacan is well, he's not a
I agree.
postmodernist
Yeah.
and he's not. It's a that wonderful comment that Todd McGowan says, like post-structuralism, no post-structuralist ever referred to themselves as a post-structuralist. Like it was just a way of defining. I think he says that it was the way Americans defined the threat, like European theory, essentially. So I don't even think there's post-structuralism. For me, Lacan is a structuralist. And what I think Zizek is exposing Lacan is actually, he's like a funny sort of structuralist because there's lack, there's negativity in this positive structure or whatever. So I think this is an important thing because it ties to a number of things in the sense that, whereas a postmodern argument would be that, someone like Derrida, I read something brilliant the other day, which someone was saying, I think it was Lacan who said that Derrida just plagiarized him. And that's really like reframed how I approach Derrida now. Um, uh, yeah, so where meaning is fluid, nothing's fixed. We're constantly reinterpreting things in various different ways. It's all about multiplicity. Well, the important point there to think of Lacan is, I don't think he's like, well, he doesn't deny multiplicity, but where does that multiplicity come from? Because to have the multiplicity, it's like you need a stable ground. You need you need you need something presupposed for all those different interpretations to run off and be made and be created. Whereas the point that Lacan makes is that actually no, it's lack. There is no stable ground. The ground has holes in it. It's fractured. It's inconsistent. There's a lack in in our ontology, in the notion of reality, in our sense of being that is therefore expressed through these multiple different ways. And obviously, Lacan approaches that through the signifier, the sliding of the signifier. Um, you know, the, if you think of a sentence, and if you think when you read a sentence, you move from word to word, and then the punctuation, the full stop, is, does fix a form of meaning. But then meaning works retroactively. You only really know what the sentence was saying when you get that full stop. So there is meaning, and things can become fixed through, ways and, forms of authority. I have a goddaughter who's at that stage where she's just asking question after question after question. And I think the last time I was with her, I just went, I don't know. I was like, I don't know. Or I think I was like, because it is, because it is. You know what I mean? And I had to
So you have to
punctuate.
be the master. Yeah.
Yeah, I was the master. I was, yeah, scansion. I just stopped it there. Boom, done. Right, we're done. Okay, that's it now. Stop asking questions. Yeah. So I think, and that for me is the difference. A very, perhaps a subtle difference, but a clear difference there in the way in which Lacan's viewing language and the world and reality, in a way, say a postmodernist would. And obviously, if we're talking about the sliding of the signifier, I like to think that, that's where one way in which you could approach the unconscious as well. Um, you know, the unconscious is structured like a language. It's not,
It's
I
not
can't
like,
say the unconscious,
yeah.
yeah, it's not language, it's structured like a language. So the same way signifiers move from signifier, I like, if you look at a sentence in front of you, don't forget the gaps between the words. And that, for me, that's where the unconscious, that's what he means about it being, the unconscious is the gaps, the inconsistencies that come out through being. Yeah, you try,
Before I interrupted you, I think we were talking about metaphorical truths. And
yeah,
I think that's where this connection's made, where yes, the kind of the kind of the fiction that gives rise to truth that you speak of is more in the realm of the gap, the contradictions, the
yes,
antagonisms, as opposed to some kind of like metaphorical truth. Because it's funny enough, you said it's like if you take someone like Jung, Jung speaks of like archetypes and whatnot. And for him, you could say, yeah, archetypes are metaphors for some deeper psychic structure. All these
yeah,
stories and myths speak
yeah,
to some substantial reality out there. But
yeah.
for Lacan, it's nah, that's not the case.
No, yeah, yeah. There's nothing deep inside of us. There's nothing, this is the weird. This is the beauty of psychoanalysis. Is that, like, I think if you speak, most popular perceptions of psychoanalysis is that you go into therapy. They often call it therapy, don't they? Or you go into psychoanalysis and you're fixed, because you find out something deep within you or something like that. And no, 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 no. Lacan saying, no, there's nothing. There's if there is, there's rubbish and there's shit, or there's nothing there. And that's kind of it about, think of truth in the same way. Truth is a distortion of our own desires and fantasies, but there's still a truth to that, if that makes sense. We can still approach the world in that relation. And certain truths work quite well in that regard, but often the way in which, if we want to explore them and if we want to, I think, take just a more considered, truthful perspective on how it all works, um, and you're looking at the ambiguity there, perhaps more between truth and lies. And
Correct. Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, what a bit of an addendum here, but I spoke to Steinman Hill, and he made a really good point that in
oh,
some sense, this is why. Not that we kind of give it a salience, but if you could, let's say, put it in a topology or like an hierarchy, you
yeah,
probably can put the hysteric a bit at the top because hysteric does, in many ways, the hysterical subject is, in some sense, most sensitive to this gap, the antagonisms, the incompleteness.
yeah,
Whereas, Steinman Hill said that the neurotic is kind of an idiot.
yeah,
He accepts he's kind
yeah.
of he's stupid. He accepts the kind of the symbolic reality as it is.
Yeah. No, and just to add, and the psychotic is completely like, because they've completely different relationship to language, and obviously they're not questioning because for them there are these sort of immediate whatever these immediate truths and everything. So yeah, no, that's a great way. I think yeah, and I think he's completely right to make that argument. It's that questioning of the other. What am I of who is the what am I of to you to the other. That questioning of desire. And I think Zizek's very clear on this that we should be in the position of the hysteric for that reason to question stuff. And that again, that starts to bring in really interesting topics around knowledge, around desire, around how these different things are portrayed, because it highlights that, nothing's ever fixed or stable, but we're always in this sort of this relationship perhaps to truth, to that is always being distorted by our own questioning, if that makes sense. And
Oh, no, no doubt. Well, I mean, I
yeah,
certainly want to discuss the subject of knowledge versus the subject of desire. I think that'd
yeah,
be a good place in fact, maybe perhaps even conclude. But before that, to this very fun bit in your paper, which I really thoroughly enjoyed reading. It's this the paradox you bring up between
yes,
I am
yeah,
lying, and I thought that was
yeah,
really
yeah,
good. And perhaps this even beautifully articulates the split subject. So you say, yeah, the paradox of I am lying, that sentence there, it's a contradictory statement or a sentence. and then you kind of outline Lacan's the subject of enunciation and enunciated.
Yeah.
And so yeah, please just outline that bit, Jack.
Yeah, I absolutely love this. I've used it across a number of different papers and different ideas, this subject of enunciation and enunciated, because for me, if you're saying, if you're following Lacan's account of the subject is divided, the subject is split. I think particularly if you're talking to someone from the social sciences, they're like, well, how, show me, what do you mean? How does that work? And this for me is a great way of sort of expressing that. So there's two things. There's the enunciated, and then there's the enunciation that Lacan refers to. And there's the I of the enunciated. So that's the statement that's made by the subject. So I am talking now and I am making statements. I'm using language, and that's what's being enunciated. There's an I in that because these words are leaving my mouth, and this is my interpretations and my expressions that are being expressed. But then there's also the I of the enunciation, and that's the position from which that is said. Okay. So that's where, for instance, the position of oneself or the position of the subject is being made. And one way Lacan highlights this is through the liar's paradox. So, for instance, if we say I am lying, that's where the ambiguity or the contradiction between the enunciation and the enunciated comes out or becomes performed, because these two things can never really align with each other. So, for instance, if a subject says "I am lying," um, then they can't, for instance, then in a certain respect, if they're equal, if they live up to that, then they can't be lying because they're telling a truth about themselves. So there's the statement, I am lying, and then there's the I, the position from which it is said. So if they, and so I am lying is this weird contradiction, because if you follow them, they're lying, so they're not lying. But then if they're not lying, then they're not a liar, if that makes sense. It's kind of weird when I often find that, it's easier to think this through when it's written down. So that's the way in which the split subject comes out. You have the split between the predication of the statement, the enunciated, I am lying, but then the position from which it is said, so the position of the person. And the two never, in the case of the I am lying paradox, they never connect. They never meet up. So you can see the path I took here. Zizek saying that AI lies, but not like a subject. So then you look at the subject, and then it's Lacan has this brilliant example of the liar's paradox that actually gets to the heart a little bit there of what is a subject. So yeah, so that's one way I tried to explore that. I've explored it in other ways. I did a paper uh, on examples where people had apologized for racism. So yeah, so I looked at how
Actually, yeah, at the outset of the conversation. Yeah.
yeah, so it was just yeah, it was two British, well, three British comedians, but two of them are like a double act. And both had like performed racist comedy scenes, and both were now having to apologize for it. But what I think got played out there was this ambiguity of the subject, the fact that you could never really truly apologize because there was this split between your apology, the statement, but then the position from which it was made. So yeah, I thought it was just an interesting way of exploring again this same dynamic. But also it's clearly there being portrayed in the AI, because the AI would say I am, the AI might say I am not lying, but then it's only ever really talking there from the enunciated. It's ignoring the position from which it's said, which is that often, it's a machine, so it's always in a certain way lying because it's not a real person in that
Well, the
regard.
problem,
So
yeah, the problem here, I think, I really like that you get at this even in the paper, but even Zizek makes this point is that in some
yeah,
sense, because the AI lacks the split that subjects do
yeah,
have, they
yeah.
can't include themselves into the equation, right? Because it's a
Mm.
machine. They can't put their subjectivity isn't caught up or entangled in the
Yeah,
mess, so to speak.
yeah, yeah. They can only speak from they can only speak from one or the other, or perhaps they can only. I can't remember how explicitly. I think in the paper I say they only ever talk from the enunciated in that regard. So they're in language. Yes, they have language and they live in language, but they don't live in it in the same way that a subject does. um, following this Lacanian argument that it doesn't, it'll never probably truly, it might express ambiguity and inconsistency, but does it understand itself as being ambiguous and inconsistent? Because as subjects, you know, we are always expressing ourselves with that ambiguity and inconsistency. It's there all the time. There's a point I make in the paper about from McGowan who says, sociality is based upon the lie. You
Yeah,
go into work on
when you
Monday
ask someone,
morning.
how was your day, and people say,
Yeah,
yeah, all
yeah.
of this, but you really want to know about their day. I don't
Oh
doubt
yeah, you could.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, you couldn't care less about it. And it's yeah, I even I find I don't want to I have probably shouldn't say this. Oh, no, they won't listen to the podcast, but I have friends and colleagues who have kids, and I always have to tell myself, don't forget to ask about the kids. Just say like, how the kids, how the boys getting on,
Right.
or
Tell
or
me about
whatever. Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, I don't, they're lovely parents. I wish nothing upon the kids, but I couldn't care less what the kids
Yeah,
are up
and the
to.
truth is it's going to be the other way around for us. I mean, I don't know if I'll ever have kids, but if my partner and I, we have
Right.
kids, I'm sure people are going to ask us about
Yeah,
our kids, and they're not
yeah,
going to
yeah. Yeah.
get so,
No, definitely, definitely. I say that, but then I always think like, like I have a great friend who'll say, "Oh, he's being a little shit at the minute," or something, or like, "Oh, they are doing my," and I can't. It's almost like when they say, I'm like, "Oh, wow, we can have a friendship." This is you've just made the conversation sexy now. When you get that sort of honest response. But yeah, these things are based upon, our whole sociality is predicated on these lies and these things that we might not necessarily have any attachment to. It's one of the things why, I tried saying this to a manager at work. I was like, they were making the claim we should all be back in the office. And I was like, you do know I will do more work at home purely based upon the fact I won't have to talk to anybody. Like if I go into the office, I'm gonna have to say hello to people and chat in the bloody resource room and stuff like that. Like at home, it's just me and the cats. Like, you know what I mean? I'll be okay. But yeah.
yeah, well, I mean, okay, here's a lovely quote from apropos stupidity. You say here, more importantly, what this more readily says is a lying like a subject. More importantly, what this more readily reveals is that it is not a better knowledge, and here's where we're getting to the topic of knowledge, that distinguishes us from the AI chatbot, but that it is in spite of our knowledge and in
Mm,
full view of what it is that we are doing, that the subject is both forged and enveloped in the capacity to lie.
yeah.
Instead, where truth is an effect of surprise triggered by its enunciation, if quoting Zizek here, for the chatbot, there's no truth to its enunciation, no gap, failure,
Yeah.
or surprise, for
Yeah.
which the truth of its position can be averred. And here's important by. As previously noted, we can now assert that in all its stupidity, the chatbot is not stupid enough to fall foul to the truth of its mistakes. And this is
Yeah.
kind of why I really like kind of dialectical thinking. You see, I love that. For instance, the dialectic between ignorance or stupidity and
Yeah.
knowledge. And you think
Yes.
we
Yeah.
speak of artificial or general intelligence, and then
Yeah.
Zizek comes in and says, "No, no, no, it's not about intelligence; it's about stupidity. That's what makes us
Yes.
human." That's
Yeah.
this brilliant philosophy
Yeah.
there.
It's wonderful. Yeah. It's brilliant. Yeah. No, it is good. It is good because like I said, it completely and utterly reframes like, in that wonderful way Zizek does. It completely reframes the discussion and sort of spins it around. We're looking at Ori now at the problem at the topic, as he so often says. But yeah, rather than think of it, we're different to AI because we're cleverer than the AI, or alternatively, perhaps AI is going to be cleverer than us. He's like, no, the true crux of it is can it be as stupid as us? Because the sheer subject will always have, a claim to stupidity that AI will never have because their stupidity will always be um uh well created, structured, you know what I mean, programmed in that regard. It won't recognize its stupidity, which I think is the real crux of the point there. It won't recognize what it's doing. It won't have that unconscious element to it, I think, which is key.
No doubt, no doubt. Yeah. All right, Jack, I want to touch a bit on your paper. I didn't read this carefully, so I
Yeah.
can't comment much on it. The It's the dialectic of desire,
Yes,
AI
yeah,
chatbots, and the desire to know. However, before we get to that, just again to probably be a kind of now repeating this point ad nauseum here, perhaps you could outline how you would differentiate a subject of knowledge and a
yeah.
subject of desire.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So this was actually, as again, I've kind of fallen into writing these papers on AI. As I said, I read the Zizek article and felt inspired to explore the argument in a paper. This was from the very first paper I actually did on AI. Um, and I was trying to think about the way in which I wondered if we still use it this way. I'm not sure if I think the theoretical arguments I make hold up, but I think there's perhaps more of a debate that could be made about its sort of relationship to AI. But one of the things when I was first using AI, to me, it was almost like a brilliant Google. Like, you use a Google search, and Google's great. We've had it for years. We love it. We all use it. But you get millions of responses. You get loads. But what was quite nice about AI was that it was like this source of knowledge in the sense that you could say, where's the best restaurant or something or other, or you could ask it something. And most of the time it was just giving you one response. It was giving you the knowledge that you were looking for. So this got me thinking about how this works because obviously there's the famous, Lacan says that we want to know nothing, the quote is, the subject wants to know nothing more about it, i.e., we don't want to know our symptoms. We don't want to know our unconscious, which is part of the sort of what would you call it? The sort of the paradox of psychoanalysis is that actually we probably don't want to change the fact that we keep choosing the wrong partner because we get that sort of unconscious enjoyment out of being
Jouissance.
tested by them. Yeah, we get the jouissance, we get the fun of being with them, and that's where our enjoyment, our jouissance lies. So that really got me thinking because I thought, well, hold on, AI has been framed as this source of knowledge, but we don't, according to Lacan, we don't actually want knowledge in that regard. We're subjects of desire. So I was really interested in that, and I couldn't make the connection. I think I was looking back through my notes, and lo and behold, Todd McGowan had a chapter in his book on Christopher Nolan where he explores the relationship between the subject of knowledge and the subject of desire in relation to the film Memento, to Christopher Nolan's film Memento. So for me, this was again two ways in which you could explore AI. So one of the things to bear in mind with the subject of knowledge is that the subject of knowledge is inherently somebody who's always looking to the future. They're a hopeful subject who is out there trying to engage with the world to garner knowledge about it and collect that knowledge and become more knowledgeable. Okay, so and again, that kind of makes sense. Is that not what academics are doing through their research? Scientists. Even even someone who's non-academic who just wants to have more of an understanding about a particular author or topic, you go and you research it. But Lacan again just messes with that a bit because he's saying we don't want knowledge of the truth. We don't want knowledge of certain things. So this starts to now move into desire, and this is where we get the subject of desire. For Lacan, we're not knowledgeable subjects, we are subjects of desire. And by that, what he's getting at is it's not saying that we don't, for instance, seek the truth. We don't, for instance, just live in ignorance and stupidity and don't want knowledge. Some of us perhaps maybe do, but that actually our path to knowledge and truth is distorted by the subject's desire. Um, if I was to go into psychoanalysis, so I would probably, what was it about Lacan? Like, it's not the fact that I started reading Zizek that's interesting. What was the desire to read Zizek that is more interesting? What was the distortion in the exploration of knowledge that played out in that regard? So this is really interesting because what it's saying is we're not like subjects here trying to garner all this knowledge and understanding about an objective world that sits outside of us and we can just collect objects and know about them. But actually what it's saying is the two are far more sort of implicated or interdependent. That actual fact the subjects of desire, our path for truth and knowledge is distorted by that desire. Okay. Um, and this started, it got me thinking because actually it got me thinking about how, desire and enjoyment, and actually it's often what dissatisfies us is where we get the most enjoyment from and what maintains that relationship to desire. moving more into the drive as well. And in the paper,
Yeah,
I
you,
explain.
you start enjoying the failure or to
Yes, yeah,
get knowledge.
yeah. And this is wonderfully. This is the argument I make in sport. Sport is the win is not what you want. It's everybody wants a win. I'm not being stupid, but like you realize actually the failure is the fun of it type thing. Uh, Yeah, I know a bit on tangent, but it was the most beautiful example. So
Oh,
I was in
honestly, go
Dublin
ahead.
for this conference. I was in Dublin for this conference, and there's a team in the one thing I didn't get. I didn't get it was a Gaelic sport. I think it was hurling. I think it was hurling, the Gaelic sport they play in Ireland. And there's a team in Mayo that have lost a final, I think 11 times. 11, they've lost the final 11 times. They got to the final, they won it in 1951, and then they've been in 11 finals since then, and they've lost every single one. They lost six in like a decade or something or other, like these finals. And like and I was speaking to these Irish colleagues, and they went, it's even better than that because like the most recent one in the semi-final, they beat the unbeatable team. They were fantastic. They beat the best team, and then they went in the final and they still lost. So, it was a bit. I suppose it's a bit like the Red Sox, isn't it? They didn't win the what do you call it, the baseball World Championship, whatever. For whatever 100, how many years? God, so many years. But I was trying to say, look, like the second they do win it, then they're not good. They've lost what made it fun, what made it enjoyable. So it's that dissatisfaction, it's the failure we enjoy. But to get it back to AI, what I realized was the whole premise of AI was not as a source of knowledge. You know, it encouraged you to carry on. It was actually playing or the way in which it was using our desire, not in a sense that it's like some being that can read our desire, in the sense that it's like it knows what we're thinking. But what it was doing was it was an outlet for us to read or to express our desire because you can ask it a question, but then often it will come up saying, do you want a bit more about this? Or, you know, um, you know, show me the best restaurant. Give me the best 10 restaurants in Toronto. Okay, here's 10. Do you want any more? Do you want me to elaborate on one of them? Okay, actually, yeah, elaborate on the third one. That was an Indian restaurant. I want to know what that's, why is that one good? What's the food there? Um, so that for me was this really we don't use AI as a source of knowledge, but we relate to AI as subjects of desire. Our knowledge is never fulfilled.
I
Yeah.
agree. I think that's
And
a very perspicacious point there because it's funny though, like I think now, because my day job, I'm a software engineer, I do
right. Oh, cool.
sometimes I remember I used to use when AI came out, I used it a bit
Yeah.
for programming because it was a bit fun to ask it to, write a function that
Yeah.
divides an array or whatever, something simple like
Yeah.
that. But then eventually I realized, oh man, this thing is making me deeply unproductive because what's happening is because it kind of hooks in your desire, you end up just prompting it questions all the time. Okay, can I
Right.
optimize the loop here? Can I make this API call out this function, use
Yeah.
this whatever
Yeah. Yeah.
library? And then you end up not doing any work because it hooks in your desire. Whereas sometimes you just sit and focus and write the program, and
Yep.
it's still a really good program, but you're still a lot more productive writing the code on your own because at least in this case, it's just your
Yeah.
stupid self doing the
Yeah.
stupid programming. So
Yeah.
I found, and after that I canceled all my AI subscriptions. I mean now more for like political reasons I don't use it,
Yeah.
but I realized there's something very the way it yeah, you're right. I think the way you point out in the paper, it does expose a certain psychic structure in us, the way we
Yeah.
engage with these AI agents.
Yeah. No, that wonderful. Yeah. A perfect example. Yeah. That's exactly, the lines that I was thinking on. And I suppose if it's doing that, then I suppose perhaps a more hopeful point that I was trying to make in the argument is, okay, and I do borrow this a lot from sort of like Matthew Fisleder, who's like a great critical scholar of social media, but it's also like saying it's not inherently bad. Like you shouldn't just give up on social media. Like it can be quite brilliant and wonderful uh in that respect. And I was kind of thinking the same about AI a little bit. I was like, well, it's not inherently bad AI. so and it's clearly going to be something that's there. It's almost coming in. It's now inbuilt in laptops, isn't it? So, you know, it, I've had this discussion with academics, who are sort of pulling their hair out over students using AI, and I'm like, well, yeah, but Christ Almighty, like it's like asking a student not to use. I remember, when I was younger, you were told like if you did your homework, you can't use the internet. Like you had to. So like, well, you had this ridiculous. Well, okay, we had encyclopedias. I would go look at a book. But my God, like if you said to a student now, don't use the internet for research,
Recent
you'd be a
battle.
lunatic.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
all of that, I think here, Todd McGovern, I really liked it. He said this in one of the streams he was on where he doesn't
yeah,
care to use AI. Like he's like, it's
yeah,
like
yeah.
use whatever you want
Oh
to use.
God, yeah.
He's
Oh God,
fighting that
I don't
battle.
know. There's a no, it's a, not sure. I wish some students bloody did use. Like I've had some work from
All right,
students where I'm
give
just
me
like,
some, give
oh
me some
God.
name and shame. Now I'm joking. I'm joking.
I love all my and I despise people that criticize students. I think it's the worst thing an academic can do. But there's some, and I'm just like, good God, just run it. You could have tidied that paragraph up, you know what I mean, or at least got it, checked. And so I've tried to like integrate it into my teaching there. And I think, yeah,
Agree.
I
Yeah,
don't really care. Yeah, you can do them. There's some brilliant things. So I have an assessment at the minute where the students have to do. It's on a sports journalism module. So they have to do like a feature article. And I've sort of said, like, look, they'll bloody AI can write them a phenomenal feature article. So what I've incorporated as part of the assessment is they have to then reflect on the article. So they have to tell me why they're using particular sources, why they chose that opening, why the narrative is that way, what's that building towards. So it's getting them to think critically of this, of what it is they're doing. And I think that can still be used in academic essays. All right, okay, fair enough. AI might have given you that source, but what's the source doing? I don't care what they're quoting. I want them to learn the formal aspects of writing a coherent critical argument. And
I
again,
can't.
you can still, yeah, yeah, and I perhaps because that's what AI won't be able to do, if you know what I mean, or it won't give it that personal, that's what you assess in a student.
Well,
So
I mean, look, I think it's important to
yeah,
make this
sorry.
clear, Jack, because like, see, we're talking about split subjectivity. We're talking about all
Yeah,
these the contradictions in the subject, the
yeah,
desire, whatnot. And I think sometimes I find, now you may disagree with me here, but maybe perhaps a caricature of kind of Lacanian psychoanalysis as we're talking of like desires and lack and all of this. It can be a very cynical view of human nature. Or well, we don't say those words like human nature, but
yeah,
of human beings.
no, yeah,
I don't think that's the case though. I think at the end of the day, I find, at least with my very superficial understanding of these things, is that psychoanalysis is it's a very humanistic discipline. It's in fact, you could even argue it's a continuation of the Enlightenment project. It's
yeah,
about reason, it's about the ability that human beings have to, yes, as you say, kind of like to put it in just like very colloquial terms, to reflect, to kind
yeah,
of be self-aware to a certain
yeah,
extent.
yeah. No, no, yeah, and I think you're completely right. I think if you was to take it at face value, I think and because Patrick says something, Lacan is a poet of lack. Like it's just a poetics of lack. He's just again pushing forward lack. Nothing's complete, nothing's whole, and that can be quite negative. I've really tried to like when I've tried to share psychoanalysis in the sports world, with sports scholars, like it takes what I find is it takes like a good 15 minutes just to get them to know what I mean by that. Like I'm not saying we're all like idiots or we're all like we've got something missing or something like that. But it's to see it as a generative force in our sense of being. There was nothing for there to be something. And that's where I think, when you view it on an ontological level, that makes some really good points. And I think one of my frustrations with sociologists is they're brilliant at epistemology, but they don't ever really make connections to ontology. And in a sense, there isn't just a postmodern sort of like, well, there isn't one or there is no one reality, and there are all these constructions. Oh, yes, okay, we know that. But again, as we were discussing earlier, that it might be because the reality is inconsistent that you get all those
Correct.
different
Yeah, no, I
so
think
yeah,
here's where again the Slovenian school is just brilliant and
yeah, yeah,
just spectacular, where they bring in Hegelian philosophy. Because I mean, in
yeah,
philosophy, the whole my understanding of it is from the bit I've read in phenomenology and bit of the science of logic is that it's this sort of the dialectic kind of moves through the failure.
Yeah.
And the
Yes.
failure
Yeah.
is what gives rise to something
Yeah.
radically new, to use the term by,
Yes.
I think, the
Yeah.
generic Adrian Johnson, or the ontological
Yeah.
incompleteness. It's a true thing. And you
Yeah.
put it beautifully where, yeah, it is an ontological reality that there's something new that can come out of this, what on the surface looks like something negative or perhaps even cynical.
No, yeah, yeah, it's face value negative. It looks cynical. I mean, it's the Samuel Beckett quote, I think, isn't it? Fail again, fail better. Like, so,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, and that, I mean, that
Try
to me
again,
was,
fail again, fail better. Yeah.
that's it, yeah. And I just that to me was just revolutionary, like in how I looked at, it's the argument I've made in relation to sport. Sport is all about failure. You lose far more than you ever win in sport, and when you do win, the second that trophy is won, the next tournament starts technically, and there's going to be a new winner. So you never really accomplish anything. I felt it with writing and books as well. That when I'm writing a paper, like in my head, I'm thinking best paper in the world. Got to shut down the discussion. This is it. But actually, then I read it, and then I finish it. I read through it. I absolutely hate it, and then I know when I hate it, I have to send it off, and then I have to write the next paper because when I read that paper, when it is out, I think, shit, I just said that wrong, or I didn't say that actually how I wanted to say it. So it's a generative failure in that regard. Nothing's ever complete or finished or accomplished in that regard. And that to me was just, I can't express how on a personal level that has helped me, just relate to the world. And it goes out beyond that. Yeah, if you engage with Lacan, if you truly engage with Lacan, we were talking about, Mary Ruti earlier. Look at her books. As I said, I was reading the book on penis envy at the minute,
Yeah.
and it was just, the way she talks about her own personal relationships there with her mother, and her father, and how they've changed over the course of her life. Like, yeah, it's not self-help, but my God, there's things that have happened to me personally where I sort of, you've got all the emotions and all the anger and all the frustrations and all that, and then you just sort of think, well, psychoanalysis would say just look at it, or perhaps there's this is occurring for this reason, or perhaps you need to appreciate it from this perspective because that's going on, and it's just basic stuff like that. That it can be, yeah, it's a yeah, yeah, and again, it helps. It bloody helps, and yeah, you can apply that theoretically to all the problems I believe that academia is exploring in that
I'm not,
regard.
I'm not sure if it was a pun you just used there. You said it's generative. So generative AI, we're talking about AI.
Yes.
That's a good
Yeah,
one.
yeah, yeah. That's good.
It is generative. Well,
Yeah,
in our case, the kind of uh generativity we are talking of is it's really generative, not the kind of the AI where it just takes information and kind of synthesizes and spits something out. But this is something that's radically generative. It's funny,
yeah.
I don't know if you know, she's a great, yeah, Hegelian scholar, Catherine Everett. She does great work.
Everett. Oh, yes. Yeah,
No,
yeah,
Catherine
yeah,
Everett. I had her on the podcast.
yeah,
Recently, I saw a tweet by her. I'll put it on as an
yeah,
overlay for the viewer. You'll
yeah,
see it now.
yeah,
It's where there's like a meme where there's this very depressed guy that's saying Dostoevsky novels, nothing
yeah,
is solved. The world is a mess. Nothing is solved. And then she
yeah,
says, "Well, make you view the nothing is solved optimistically and continuously, and then you have Hegel. That's it. So
yes.
with Hegel, it's nothing is solved, but that's a good thing."
Yes, no, she's brilliant. Yeah, no, that's a great. That's it. That's it. That's exactly it. And I suppose, that is the Ljubljana school's Hegelian take on Lacan, which, to me, just made Lacan. It just made, it makes Lacan make sense, and then you understand Hegel as well. It's like two for one. It's brilliant, and you can now, and then you read these philosophers and scholars, and you're like, bloody hell, this is great. But yeah, no, X Twitter is an awful place to be, and I wonder if everyone should be following Catherine Everett. And I wonder if the only reason I'm still on is to see her memes like that. I have noticed that it's quite, I think I stay on for like Egan Hamza's links, because there's always something there to like Zizek, or some new link, which is great. But yeah, and Catherine Everett, yeah, there's still a little bit of hope perhaps on Twitter, because you can still get great content like that.
Yeah, yeah, for better, as they say, for better or worse.
Yeah,
But look, to weave this in.
Yeah.
back to the your paper on AI, I think this is an important one because we really didn't touch on this. Sort of how the technology is changing the modern subject. Now, I kind of want you to touch on that in this sense. Of course, oh my God, like this is probably discussed ad nauseum, the
Yeah.
impact of the internet and social media
Yeah.
on human beings and yada yada, right? So, but you make an interesting point. In fact, maybe I'll just read it out, the way you
Yeah.
conclude uh, the paper. So it's a bit of a mouthful here, so bear with me. It says here, while it is under present circumstances widely acknowledged that chatbots continue to lack the intuitive understanding of social contexts that humans possess, what AI chatbots reveal is that lying is not simply about deception. It is instead a very human tool for navigating complex social dynamics, maintaining relationships, and preserving social harmony. Ultimately, when faced with the straightforward responses of the chatbot, we are confronted with its ignorance of these social nuances, whereas the honesty and ongoing improvements in AI technology may offer advantages in terms of accuracy and efficiency. Such embracement belies certain uniquely human qualities, namely our capacity to lie. And this is how you conclude it. But then you also make this point. You say, I think I can't find that excerpt. I'll try to find it while you're talking. But the
Yeah.
notion that, well, by us interacting with AI bots or AI agents, in some sense, this uniquely human capacity to lie, we might lose it. And that
Yeah.
for you would be, in some sense, a tragedy, because by
Yeah.
losing that capacity to lie, we also miss out on these social nuances that very much makes us human and kind of
Yeah.
puts us in this interconnected symbolic network.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think if we end up lying like for everything we've said in this talk, for everything the paper says, if we end up lying like AI, then we've lost the subject, the authentic lie, the lie that makes us subjects. Yeah, that to me would be the end of the subject. That yeah, then AI is one. And I suppose the only, we're talking here about something that, could happen, say, whatever in the future. But, I think it's there, for instance, when, I have said to colleagues before, they were like, well, are there any AI checkers out there to see if, like, to use the example of students again, are students using AI? And I sort of said, look, if you play around with AI, I've been teaching for over, like easily over like 10 years now. Like I can tell when they've used AI because there's a tone to it. They're not writing like subjects. They're not writing like students. Um, you
They
know,
all write like people on LinkedIn.
yes, yes, yeah. There's a real yeah. To me, there's a real tone to it. To me, the only way, and this is no disrespect to any North Americans, but it does have like an American sort of like hey there, sort of like little tone to it that sort of kicks, like, is there in the writing style. It relies upon certain words. It loves the word delve, doesn't it? Like, I had a student who I know, PhD student who I know wasn't using it, and she'd used delve, and I went expel that word from this, because to me it's like ding 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 ding. I'm thinking, yeah, and then she was like, oh God, right, is that really true? I was like, yeah, it loves there are certain words, and obviously it might get better where that's the case, but you can what's being lost there is the capacity to write and speak and articulate yourself like a subject, which comes with all the nuances and the inconsistencies of being a subject. So, each writer has a certain structure and form to their writing that won't always necessarily, and I'm not saying, you know, will have a tone to it. I'd argue, for me, one of the problems I'd argue in my writing is I might elongate a sentence a bit too long, but that's how it's me writing. Okay, that's how it. That's my, and I work on it, and I'll try and make it clearer. Uh, but at the same time, other writers can write very clearly, but for me, I find it a bit like it's a bit sentencey. It's a bit dum 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 dum. Like it's, you know what I mean? There's little bits there
It
that AI
writes
doesn't
like
get.
a human resources person. It writes like a
Yes, yeah.
therapist,
Yeah.
writing
And I
emails.
think if we look at that, yeah, definitely. LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn purely for because I have to be professionally. but it's what, my good God, what are these like? How do these people do it? Some people are so on there, and it's all like the way people talk and like congratulate each other. I can't, you know. And the point there is that if you spend, I've got people at work, I want to go up to them and be like, you don't sound like you do when you're speaking to me. You sound weird, like when you're on LinkedIn. And they'll probably be like, oh, I know very well, but nevertheless, I have to do it because I need to promote this project or, I'm having to do
There we
that.
go.
And
Yeah, that's it.
yeah, and I'm like, someone will do something and they'll be like, congratulations, great. And I'm like, you hate that person. I know for a fact you hate that person. Yeah, it's an AI world, bloody LinkedIn. Mm,
Yeah,
yeah,
funny
yeah.
enough, and I think people talk about AI will take our jobs and all of that. I mean, I hope it does. I want it to take our jobs. I mean, those kinds of jobs. Who wants a job like that to make, I
No,
don't know, LinkedIn marketing content posts?
yeah. And this is, you know, was that not the purpose of technology? Like, you know what I mean? I mean, my parents, I don't know, like in the UK, like my parents, the big thing in the 50s and 60s, there would be a 3-day week. As time went on, we'd only have a 3-day working week because technology would be doing most of this for us. And that, doesn't happen. We
In
work
fact, the
more
opposite
now.
happened. Yeah, where I
Yeah,
mean, Thomas Piketty writes on this, we're busier than
yeah.
we've ever been.
Yeah, yeah. And and that's because these things have become they're privatized. That's the problem with AI. It's privatized. If you were able to, perhaps if they were like nationally or socially or, Zizek makes the argument, communistically owned, like there was a world AI, then yeah, the money, then the AI would be making profit and we could share the profit out and could work less. We'd have the end, we get
Yeah,
our
kind of like the
AI
Deleuze
salary.
kind of. This is kind of the Deleuzean view of technology, kind of the
Yeah.
extremist view. But I think here's where, I mean, just to connect Todd McGovern, capitalism and desire comes in. I mean, we probably need to kind of analyze even AI through, which kind of is what you're doing through the McGovern desire lens in this case.
Yes. Yeah,
Um,
yeah. So I haven't actually read I haven't read he's got his new book, isn't he? Is that the Capitalism and
yes,
Desire book? Yeah.
success. Well,
I
it's like
think
it's
I think
part two. It's supposed to be part two for capitalism and desire. The
yes. Yeah, I've read Capitalism and Desire, so I will get around to reading it. But yeah, I mean the brilliance of his work there is that he links obviously uh he links desire to capitalism, but what I think he's doing there, and obviously he's drawing upon Lacan, is he's sort of developing Marx in the sense that he makes that psychic connection there to capitalism. Obviously, surplus value, surplus enjoyment is the brilliance of Lacan, and yeah, opens up a whole new world of relating of exploring capitalism in that way as well, which is really interesting. Um,
all right, Jack. I think to kind of maybe conclude with a bit of a fun speculative question.
yeah, yeah.
Since we're talking about AI and of course psychoanalysis, I have to ask this. Um, if you could imagine this, do you think a machine? Because okay, let me rephrase. I still believe that psychoanalysis is a very much materialist discipline. It's a materialist
Yep.
philosophy.
Yeah.
It's not this, and there's no idealism or Platonism. It's very materialistic, or materialist, sorry, in that sense. So therefore, I've got to ask, do you think a machine can have an unconscious?
Ooh. My God.
A fun speculative question.
Yeah, no, this is wonderful. You know what? No, no, I don't think it can. But I do think that we sort of, I do think we're creating we create films, like films have explored that, and we somehow seem to just be creating them. We somehow seem to be on this path where we're creating fantasies and fictions that eventually come true. I saw a brilliant meme today that was saying like "Don't Look Up." The film "Don't Look Up." Is it Adam McKay, I think, directed it? I got the name wrong. Uh, Obviously the one and the one where is an asteroid.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. The world
and
one.
the name was like, that when I can't remember when that came out. Was it during COVID or whatever? But in that, obviously, you've got the tech billionaire who's telling the American president, and the
What
cabinet
to
all
do?
what they should be
Look
doing.
at what's going on
Like,
now. Elon and
yeah,
Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I just hadn't thought of that. I saw this meme, and you just stop and go, "Fuck, like Jesus, yes, it's happening." So I don't know. I mean, Blade Runner 2049, like the most is it 2049? I forget again. I might get the title wrong. Yeah, the most recent Blade Runner.
Yeah, 3.9, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, 2049. Yeah, I've got it. Yeah. I mean, my God, yeah. I mean, if that film is not about a machine garnering some form of not necessarily conscious, but there's so many bits in that film that I'm almost certain Villeneuve read Lacan because he makes so many references to like gaps and cuts and stuff, like a cut. I think there's a line in there where they talk about it, if this, if the robots have been able to have children, then that is devastating for the subject. So I don't know. Yeah, probably. Maybe a machine will have an unconscious in the future, and
Yeah,
yeah,
because I mean, it's a fun thing to kind of just speculate on because it's really interesting. I, in fact, have had many people working in embodied cognitive science that are kind
right,
of
yeah,
focusing on AI through even phenomenology, very small pointee, and they very
yeah,
much bring the notion of embodiment, the body, and the notion of inactivism. But what's
yeah,
funny is we have in Lacanian theory, it's so much about language.
yeah,
It's about free association in psychoanalysis and
yeah,
language. And then currently kind of the big almost paradigm in AI is in fact language models. But
yeah,
nonetheless, there's something really odd that these language models are nothing like what you'd think a human subject would be in how we use language. So it's like,
yeah,
yes, you can talk of AI through these other, let's call it philosophical lenses or
yeah,
toolkits like phenomenology or cognitive
yeah,
science, but the thing that is most practical in some sense is at this moment language, and then maybe you went through Lacanian theory, we're like, oh wow, the what we thought language was something totally different to
yeah,
to
yeah.
what perhaps what something like linguistics would tell us.
No, definitely. Yeah, definitely. And the Hegelian point to make there is everything's mediated. Like I do struggle with like embodiment work. In the book on sport, I actually really critique like embodiment and phenomenological perspectives of sport because for me it ignores or bypasses or doesn't give enough attention to the fact that that phenomenological aspect is always mediated. So it's always symbolically mediated. It's always, it goes through a symbolic order in that respect. So yeah, no, no, I completely agree that like you know, Lacan focuses on language, so he's looking at the mediation, but it's not like a as he's saying something specific about language in relation like to what we've been discussing, and that's slightly different. And I think yeah, that's interesting to look at that in regards to AI, which is
Yeah,
which
I
is
agree. I'm glad that you said. I mean, obviously, I haven't read your book on
yeah.
sports and psychoanalysis.
It's not. I've only just finished it. It's not out yet.
Oh,
So
okay, I thought it was already out. Gotcha. Yeah,
this is
fantastic. So
yeah.
yeah,
Sorry, this is my. So it's under review at the minute. I finished it in November, or I finished it in November. That was last year's project, really. So it's just under review at the minute. So yeah, it's a book on sport and specifically Lacan and sport. How can Lacanian concepts be used to understand sport? Um, yeah,
yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I was going to ask what are the kind of your in-flight projects and what
right.
can we
Yeah,
expect from you in the future.
yeah. Yeah, so there's that actually. The book as well is actually like probably most books. I'm not I'm not esteemed enough to have two volumes to a book, but there is actually so the first bit is essentially introducing Lacanian ideas. So I look at the unconscious, desire, drive, jouissance, fantasy, and I also draw a lot upon. I was heavily influenced and absolutely love Robert Fallard's work on interpassivity,
Mhm.
and in particular, well, I was quoted so many times I should have it on the tip of my tongue, probably behind us. But he's The Pleasure Principle in Culture, that book. So I finished drawing upon interpassivity because I think that's a great way of exploring sport and our relationship to the other. Obviously, the big other being another concept that's used. So that's sort of like setting the stall, that book, where these are all the Lacanian concepts we can use. And then the next book I'm working on is I want to focus more. It's going to be more like well, the idea at the minute, it might change because I haven't actually started writing it or anything yet. Is I want it to be more like essay based. So I want to take like topics in sport. So for instance, I want to look at like VAR. Apologies, just need to plug in my laptop. It's going to go off. So I want to look at like VAR in particular its use. So that's the video assistant referee in football at the minute and how a topic like that can be explored through Lacanian concepts. So it'll be more topic based the second book. So I just want to dive into certain
Excellent.
issues.
Yeah.
There's one around
Have
like
people done
transgender.
from through Lacanian theory, have people really analyzed the phenomena of sport? Because I mean, for goodness sake, and forget AI, sport is just it's something almost innate to what it means to be human.
There was the thing is, I'll say no. No one's used like Lacan and sport before. It's been dribbled in certain respects, but it was wonderful. It's how I got to know him. You know, everyone, please go and read. There's a great paper by Joseph Reynoso, Boston Sucks in Psychoanalysis, Culture and Society, and he had that published, and in that he's looking at the relationship between lack, desire, and drive in relation to sport, and in particular like sporting rivalries. And at the time, it was at the time it was in publication. It hadn't come out yet. But previous to that, I'd been asked by a friend to write a chapter for a book on football, and I wanted to do something on English, like being an English football fan of the English national team, and the fact that we always lose on penalties or we always lose finals. And so naturally, I was thinking in very similar ways to Joe. I was thinking how there's something about the drive of it all, the desire, the fantasies, and that. So when I saw it, it was beautiful. I read Joe's paper and I was just like, oh my God, like this is exactly what I've been thinking. So from that, I ended up emailing him. We ended up meeting online a few times. I sent him my work. And from that, we were like, look, let's put something together on sport and psychoanalysis. So we did the special issue in Psychoanalysis, Culture and Society. And then we did the edited collection, Sport and Psychoanalysis, what sport reveals about our unconscious desires, fantasies, and fears. And I know he's still working in the area. We're going to be presenting at the LAC conference in March next month, where we've got a stream on sports. We're going to be presenting with Ryan Engley as well, looking at that. So, what we found when we did the special issue is that there's a space for it, because the reason why we did the special issue and then the edited collection was because we had so many article submissions to the special issue that there was enough to continue it into an edited collection as well. And what was quite nice was when we were doing the special issue, I think, we could only take through, I think, 12 articles or 13 articles. And our first 13, I looked at it and it was all American sport. And I was like, look, we can't have a special issue that's just American sports. So we really had to it was a real, what I'm trying to get at, there was, and the article, the submissions we got were so good, but it was like finding a decent collection, because we needed, we didn't want it all to be Lacan. So we needed a spread of theory. We needed a spread of geography, but then we also needed a spread of sport as well, because we couldn't have it all about. I think one of them, like a second round, it was all American football, and I was like, again, like that's too much. So yeah, we were able to spread them out across the two publication outlets, the book and the thing. But so is anybody doing? Yeah, people are doing it now, and there's a world out there, I think, of people. I think one thing I'm trying to do is bring psychoanalysis into sport, into sports research, into scholarly. More sociology, perhaps sports psychology as well.
Starting through sociology, it's a fantastic.
Yeah,
You can
yeah.
read.
So trying to make, yeah, yeah, trying to make those sort of links and bridges. I think the thing is that but there's loads of psychoanalysts out there who like sport, and I think hopefully what this collection is doing is like you can use those ideas that you might be using in the clinic or you might be using in other work to make sense of sport in that regard. I think I was told.
Yeah.
I think I was told by
Person that loves this theory stuff. It's just, I mean, especially the drive. I can't think of a better arena to apply the concept of the drive than sport.
yeah. Yeah, well, I was speaking to a Lacanian and they actually said that. They were like, how do you apply Lacan to sport? And I was like, the drive.
The drive, yeah. The fact
I was
that
like,
people love
like,
losing.
yeah, I was like, I know the drive. And I was like, just think about it. Like, and they were like, oh, right, yeah, I suppose. And yeah. And so, yeah, I think it's ripe for psychoanalytic investigation. So, Yeah, there was. I think there was in the 80s. There was. I forget the author. There was a book written in French that applied, I think, Lacan to psychoanalysis. But the book is like way out of print. Like I couldn't get a copy, and I don't speak French either. So yeah. So I feel like awfully, due to poor publication, that book's been lost a little bit. But hopefully, in that case, we'll just pick it up.
Yeah,
The relay baton got dropped, and we're just picking it up.
you can resurrect it.
Yeah.
Great. I mean, I'll email you afterwards, Jack, and I certainly would love to leave the links in the show notes for any of the
Oh,
listeners who
brilliant.
are interested,
Yeah.
which I'm sure there'll be a lot. And again, when the book is out, because you said it's still in publication,
Yeah.
I'd love to invite you on again to discuss specifically sports and psychoanalysis. Because again, for someone that's kind of, I always think of this. I always think of people that are kind of interested in maybe let's say Zizek or Lacan, but really, what are these guys talking about? For me, I
Mm.
always think of where can the phenomena, where can we apply it into a phenomena in the real world? And so I
Yeah.
think of let's say film or even interpersonal relationships, certainly, but then sport is a fantastic arena to apply this to.
Yeah. Definitely, definitely. It's I say in the book, sport's all about failure. It's all about the inconsistencies. It says something about being a subject sport that necessarily perhaps hasn't been looked at in that way before. And you can hate sport as well. Like I always say, my work is sport with a little S because there's so much about sport that I actually despise. Yet why on earth am I going to see my team on Sunday? You know what I mean? Like what is, why am I handing off over money to especially in a period of very bad form that I'm just like, oh, like what is that drive to do so, that jouissance that I'll subject myself to?
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
is
then,
is is really
the Zizek response to that would be, well, if you think, oh, what is this silly thing where people are kicking a ball around and like, why are you so obsessed? If you start asking that question, if you don't see why people do that, it makes you the idiot to not
right.
see
Yes.
why people are in the symbolic kind of the fiction.
Exactly. And I'll get this in. This is probably worse. Like Zizek's, a master. The one thing I'll always adore the man was he's opened up this theoretical door for me into Lacan and everything. But he's made that claim. He hasn't followed his own like he says he refers to the only reference I think he's ever made to sport was in like an interview on like Slovenian radio where they were asking him about like the Slovenia. I think Slovenia got into the Euros, the European Championship that year. And he says, "Oh, sport, it's just stupid." He talks about skiing. He goes, "You go up a hill and then you just go down it. What a stupid thing to do!"
That
Like,
makes him the
you know,
idiot then.
I
Yeah.
know, I know. And I was like, fucking, I was like, Zizek, are you kidding me, man? Like, this is. But yeah, that's his brilliance. But yeah, of course. But it is a stupid. It's absolutely. I was at this conference and I said, they were talking about online abuse, and I went, well, sport is no wonder sport is a site for online abuse. Sport is abusive, not only to ourselves, no one tells me to go run 10 kilometers, like, but I'm going to damage okay, yes, it's good for my health, but I will damage myself eventually, like doing, like running. Like, you see any former athlete, they don't walk properly. They never, that's one thing I always notice, they never walk properly. And, yeah, and I know two people that have nearly killed themselves from running. And that's not like, I don't mean like running into a car or getting hit by, no, from the actual act of running, they have nearly killed themselves. Like, so, I'm sat there going, well, I don't think we should be running. So I was like, sport is abusive. Like, coach relationships are abusive. You know what I mean? Like, go faster, like work harder. Like when you're sweating and trip,
Yeah,
it's
panting
perverse.
and
Like,
on the verge of
yeah.
coming up. Yeah, Jack, this has been really fun. Thank you so much for your time today.
This has been nothing but an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting us. The questions were brilliant. It's been brilliant. As I said, I've had a flu for about 5 weeks. So this has really cheered me up. So this is,
Oh, that's
yeah,
great to hear. In fact, the feeling's mutual because, as you know, I was under the weather too. But now, as
yeah.
I was saying, for sure, I'd love to do it again.
Yes, I will get in contact. Yeah, I'll keep, obviously the book's under review, so whatever will happen with that book. But yeah, more than happy to come on and discuss that. That'd be brilliant.